discuss what is probably my favorite thing. And Eric, thank you for having me. So, I'm going to talk to you about the transformative role of the Oceanides in Prometheus Unbound. And some of the words that Panthea says in Act 4, I think make a really good entry into one way of reading this poem. So I'm just going to quote those words from Act 4, beginning, so if you have your book there, at line 188. Now, what you actually don't read them, listen to them, because it's all about the sound of this passage, so just listen to this. Listen to how every pause is filled with undernotes, clear, silver, icy, keen, awakening tones which pierce the sense and live within the soul. The Oceanides, the daughters of Ocean, Ione, Panthea, and Asia, are in a sense the figurative undernotes of Prometheus Unbound. And they are clear, visually distinct, they each have a separate visual appearance, and truthful in what they say. They are keen observers of not only the action, but of the possible meanings of events. And they are awakening because through their words, actions, and emotions, Prometheus is released from his suffering, but all of humanity in the poem is awakened from its delusions about power. So I think when it comes to Act 2, as tough as Act 1 is, we enter into shaky territory. And the Oceanides introduce us into very unstable realms. And probably when you were reading through a lot of their passages in Act 2 and beyond, you may have found them even harder to pin down than Prometheus and Jupiter. We might be tempted to think that the Oceanides perform the role of a traditional Greek chorus, which provides an interpretive commentary on the action. And indeed they do witness, comment on, and interpret the action as the much larger and more homogeneous Greek chorus would have done. But Shelley's characters are individuated and fundamental to the story in ways not usually found in Greek drama. They may actually, in my opinion at least, be the main characters in Shelley's play. Many critics have noted that Prometheus says and does little after Act 1. And one of the reasons for this is that the Oceanides do the heavy lifting. That Hercules' unbinding of Prometheus is just the outward expression of a far more important inner event that's performed by the Oceanides and explained by them, by Panthea, Asia, and Ione. Disproportionate attention in Shelley studies is paid to the titanic struggle of Jupiter and Prometheus. Okay, so it's mostly what critics like to talk about. And yet, the Oceanides are the only characters in all 4 acts. And they speak, collectively, the 3 of them, more of the lines of the drama than any of the other characters. Furthermore, they bring about the liberation of Prometheus, humanity, Earth, and the cosmos on the level of plot. And more importantly, they convey Shelley's vision, which I think is ultimately a repudiation of that titanic struggle that interests us as readers so greatly. So I don't deny that the struggle between Jupiter and Prometheus is pretty dramatic and pretty interesting. I still think that the Oceanides propose a differently focused reading and interpretation of the poem than the one that critics maybe have predominantly given it. In a sense, they woo Prometheus, and by implication us, away from what Colin just mentioned is often called the alienating ego of Prometheus through Jupiter and the curse. Okay. And they act a little bit like Coleridge, the famous poet Coleridge. He said one of his definitions of the imagination was it dissolves, diffuses, and dissipates in order to recreate. I think that's what the Oceanides do. I think they dissolve the curse, they diffuse the hatred, which causes the suffering in the first place, and they dissipate the hatred and the suffering as well. So there's a blurring of boundaries with the Oceanides, for sure. There's a kind of diffusive quality to them. In Act 2, we entered the nebulous dream world in which they live and through which they travel. So I'm going to talk about each of them individually, taking into account that they have separate characters and that they are individuated, but at the same time, the boundaries between them blur and merge, just as we saw the boundary between Jupiter and Prometheus blur. Ione. The first to speak is the youngest of the three. And Stuart Curran has done a wonderful job of showing the associations of her name. She's connected to Aeschylus's Io, and Io is also the name of the daughter of a water god. The Yoni were the celebrated fertility symbol of Indian night, and the Ionides were nymphs of the river Kithaeron. Ione is a character from the fifth act of a ballet called Prometheus, a Vigano ballet, which influenced Shelley's composition of the poem greatly. Ione's language is the closest to the pure lyricism toward which the poem progressively moves the reader. The neatly symmetrical 9-line lyrics of Ione and then Panthea at line 222 of Act 1, beginning, "My wings are folded o'er my ears," interrupt the Miltonic blank verse. So the language before that is very heroic, it's powerful, but anguished. So what is Ione like? She perceives and experiences events first, in an innocent and aesthetic way. Throughout all 4 acts, she is the asker of questions. What didst thou see? What next? And yet felt you no delight from the past sweetness? Frequently the form of what she says overshadows how she says it, or what she says. The form of how she says something overshadows what she says. So her sound, through rhyme, rhythm, alliteration, assonance, various musical sounds, contrasts with the language that has preceded it, the heroic language that has preceded it. Her observations are perceptual, emotional, and intuitive, rather than logical, reasoned, or analytic. And as in the audience for Greek tragedy, according to Aristotle's theory at least, pity and fear are her predominant responses. In addition to providing a lyrical counterpoint, first, to notice the consoling spirits who come not long afterwards. She is the first to prophesy the joining of the East and West. Beholdst thou not 2 shapes come from the East and West, come as 2 doves to one beloved nest? And it is Ione who first hid the shell for safekeeping. Asia's nuptial boon or wedding gift, a shell with a flame in it, which symbolizes a voice to be accomplished. Prometheus tells Ione to give the shell to the spirit of the hour. That's the hour of humanity's liberation. And the message of freedom then will be disseminated over what Shelley in another poem, Out to the West Wind, called Unawakened Earth. The shell is a trumpet of a prophecy. In Act 4, Ione sees the winged child, the moon with its beautiful whiteness, arise in a final cosmic dance, and she is the first to hear Demogorgon's closing words. So the whole poem ends with Demogorgon's closing words, which we looked at in the last seminar. She says, "There is a sense of words on my ear." Childlike Ione models the purest elements of humanity, our perceptiveness and our innocence. Panthea. Panthea is the middle of the three sisters, and from a poetic perspective, she may well be the most interesting. She has multiple roles. She is a messenger, an interpreter, a translator, a teacher, a poet, and indeed a prophet. And she performs the play's first genuine action, the first action that can be called an action. And that's when she leaves Prometheus to go to the valley in which Asia is exiled. And this action sets all the other actions in motion. She initiates the reader in Act 2 into the realm of dream and desire. Panthea's role, in a way, most closely approximates Shelley's own, as she leads us away from the high language of Act 1, the language of the curse, and the language surrounding the curse, into a different language, an unchained language of poetic possibilities. "Since I am made the wind," she says, "of thy most wordless converse, which fails beneath the music that I bear." The name Panthea contains the name of the Greek titan Thea, which means goddess or divine, and the word pan, meaning all. Panthea's name then alludes to all which is divine, all gods and goddesses. Among Prometheus, the names in Prometheus Unbound, only Panthea's represents the universally sacred. With Greek, pagan, and Hindu associations, Panthea is an antidote to the tyrannical, monotheistic, patriarchal sky god represented by Jupiter. While his language, Jupiter's language, is static and denotative, Panthea's is fluid and connotative. She descends from the top of the mountain in Asia's valley and the Hindu Kush mountains. And Asia's been waiting longingly for this sister who is her messenger. And what do the sisters do when they meet for the first time in a long age? They talk about their dreams. Panthea's one dream describes a physical and spiritual unification with Prometheus. "I saw not, heard not, moved not, only felt his presence flow and mingle through my blood, till it became his life, and his grew mine, and I was thus absorbed." Dominated by verbs, saw, heard, felt, flow, mingle, became, grew, absorbed. It's a lot of verbs in a short space. Panthea's language expresses physical and mental processes more than outcomes. Her dreams, in a way, can be read as miniature visionary poems. Whereas Panthea and Ione experience a similar dream. They're dreaming a very similar dream to one another. Panthea is aware of the necessity of trying to communicate or translate the dream. The dream is of also this unification with Prometheus on one hand, but also his resurrection, right? His pale, wound-worn limbs fell from Prometheus, and the azure night grew radiant with the glory of that form which lives unchanged within. Ione, then, is more closely associated with perception, and Panthea with communication and imagination. Panthea's other dream is of the almond blossoms being blown off the trees, and the words follow, follow are stamped on the almond blossoms. Asia has some trouble getting a handle on the second dream, but she remembers dreaming the same words. She has an analogous dream. And through looking into Panthea's eyes, she sees the visualized text of a poem. Asia sees the visualized text of a poem. Follow, follow. And she accepts the meaning of this text, and she follows. She goes on her journey downward. In this way, Panthea's dreams are symbolic of Prometheus Unbound itself. Because we could say that Shelley conceives of his own poem as influencing the reader in a similar way. Each reader is led into the depths of the human mind in order to question, among other things, power. The ideal reader is, of course, one who shares a similar dream to the poet's dream, right? If you understand the poem, it's because you share a similar dream. So words follow words into the deepest reaches of the mind, represented here by the cave of Demogorgon. Panthea's last words in Act 4, a command to listen, O list, address not only Ione, to whom she's speaking, but also each reader of the poem. They draw attention to our role as listener and our responsibility to hear and fulfill Demogorgon's final moral supplication, because that's what she's introducing. When she says, oh, list, or listen, she's introducing Demogorgon's final moral supplication to us to defy power, to love and bear, and to hope, till hope creates from its own wreck the thing it contemplates. Demogorgon's words are described by Panthea as a universal sound like words. Very interesting. So Demogorgon, then, we're to understand, is actually not capable of language. He doesn't speak. He's completely reliant on Asia to give words to what he's saying. His thoughts or his meanings are wordless. So Asia says, my heart gave the response thou hast given, and of such truths, each to itself must be the oracle. Asia. Asia is the hero of the story. Not that I say hero and not heroine. She's probably the heroine too, but I think she's the hero. Because in the 19th century, heroes and heroines had quite different roles, and Asia's is very active. She's the liberator here. Her name, like the Indian landscape in which the poem is set, directs us to the importance of Hindu